Audio testing, 1, 2, 3. Lights on, camera rolling, and action.
Welcome to the Scaling Creator Podcast, the one-stop shop that explores problems, solutions, and stories for business-minded creators. I'm Soren Dickens.
And I'm Eriksen Dickens.
We'll be talking about everything from self-discovery, storytelling, leadership, marketing, sales, operations, and finance.
If you like a healthy dose of education mixed with a generous dash of insightful entertainment, prepare for your ears to be pleasured. Oh yeah.
Make sure to check us out at scalingcreator.com and also join our free Discord community.
Scaling Creator launching in 3, 2, 1.
The following content is not intended for all listeners, but we strongly encourage all listeners to listen regardless. Welcome to the Scaling Creator Podcast. I'm here with Eriksen Dickens. We're here right now, going to be going over a little bit about our background, where we're from, and really just the origin of Scaling Creator. So Eriksen and I, 7 years ago, started Platinum Peak Productions, a video agency, back when we were students at Cal Poly, and that really transformed like a generic video production company, just being videographers, into something that now is a worldwide video agency where we service clients all over the world. Whoop, whoop. Here's the thing. It was not a overnight success by any means. And I think to really get an understanding about who we are, it's best to dive into our backstory to get to know a little bit about us, because right now, we're not in our original environment. We're in an environment that's a lot different than where we grew up. And I think it's important for creators to really understand, first and foremost, where they're from, how they were raised, what their upbringing was like, what cultures they were exposed to as a youngster, and also who their circle became as they started to grow as a creator. So here we are.
Great introduction, Soren, by the way. That was very well said. I do think it's super important to understand a person's backstory, because then you understand them a lot better. I've always been a huge believer in, when you really want to understand a person, you got to go back a few years. You got to understand what they went through. You got to understand the environmental factors that shaped them. That way you get a very full, robust view on the current person. And then oftentimes when you understand a person's past, you can almost sometimes guess or dictate where their future will be as well. And so I think it is kind of advantageous of us, we're doing this podcast, the Scaling Creator Podcast, diving back a few years and just kind of doing some reflecting, see what we can come up with here in terms of how the course of our lives, the course of our upbringings shaped us to who we become. So where are we from? Where did we grow up?
We're from Oakdale, California, the cowboy capital of the world, the greatest city in America.
Big shout out Oakdale.
It really is probably one of the best cities in California.
So we were born and raised in the cowboy capital of the world. I'm going to say it because I think it's true.
It is true, but we got to get some barbecue.
We got to get some good barbecue. Some brisket. I mean, brisket's the thing that I feel like would really turn some heads in Oakdale. It is astonishing to me that nobody outside of California, or at least the West Coast, even knows what tri-tip is.
Yeah.
You ask people outside of the state of California, what's tri-tip? They're like, what is that? Is that food?
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean? It's no brisket and ribs and pulled pork are.
Seriously. Growing up in the Central Valley, it really is, it's special. Just to say it, throw it out there, because when you spend time outside of California, most of the United States is actually like the Central Valley. But what's cool about the Central Valley is you get the perspective of these economies like Los Angeles, San Francisco, even Seattle and Portland. You get that influence, but you also have that old American culture, the roots of America, and a lot of the traditions that come with that. So when you grow up in the Central Valley and you're able to step outside and hear those people say, "Oh, we don't even know what tri-tip is," or we don't have agriculture here. It's like, oh, well, where we grew up is actually really special.
It's so special. And I don't think that people who grow up in the Central Valley, especially in the smaller towns in the Central Valley, they don't really realize that until they get older. Because when you're in it and you're growing up in it, you don't quite get it until you get a little bit older and you have more room to compare. You've seen a little bit more, then you have a basis to compare where you were raised. And so at least that's how it was for me. You grew up in Oakdale, small town in the Central Valley, and, you'd hear it from some people occasionally that Oakdale, you're a special place. You're lucky to live here. And I was always, okay, yeah, I like Oakdale. But then when you get older, you really, truly realize how unique and distinct it is in today's world, especially California,
Oh, especially California. I mean, if you think about where Oakdale's located, there have been times when I was in high school where I would literally go skiing an hour and 30 minutes. I'd go east, and then 2 days later, I would go west and I'd be at the coast hanging out with friends on the beach.
Right.
Like, where else in the world?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are other places in the world where you can do that.
Yeah.
But in California,
Right.
the most desirable place to live in the entire world.
Mm.
Okay, cost of living, affordable.
Right.
People, great.
Mm-hmm.
Community, 100%.
Education system, at least in Oakdale.
And the
is very
education
good.
system. Yeah, it's like people will actually, they'll literally cheat their kids into the Oakdale education system.
Yeah.
We have
The sports culture. Yeah.
and the sports culture.
Mhm.
It's somewhat of a utopia in that regard, because the thing is like when you're growing up, one of the most important things as a young adult when you're looking to have kids is, okay, where are my kids going to be going to school?
Mm-hmm.
So people are literally fighting over the real estate in Oakdale because they want to have their kids go to school in Oakdale.
Mm-hmm.
What does that say? That's something,
Yeah,
I mean, it's
totally.
incredible.
The crime is much lower than other areas in the Central Valley. Like you said, education, the community itself. It's a community that truly cares about itself.
Right.
You get that vibe when you're there. And I've heard that from people who I've met that have moved to Oakdale from the Bay Area or somewhere else out of state. And they come there based on what they've said. It's like you really do feel welcome there. You feel that sense of community. It kind of fosters that feeling of you're going to have a person's back who's from Oakdale, even if you don't really know that person.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
100%.
if you are at a bar or something somewhere in a different city and some guy from Oakdale is getting in a bar fight, I'm probably going to go and intervene on the person from Oakdale's side's behalf just because he's from Oakdale. Like, it's that simple. You feel that when you're there. It's special in today's world. And like I said earlier, you don't really feel that until you're a little bit older and you've seen more of the world. You've seen more life experiences. And it made me very grateful, I would say, especially when I left Oakdale, moved to college. I felt very grateful for where we were raised.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. It's something that it's hard to see it when you don't remove yourself from that community. But as soon as you step away,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you're out in the hustle bustle, especially when you're in these big cities, like when I'm out and about and I'm in these big cities, I'm traveling, the only thing I can think about is looking at an empty pasture with like 3 cows,
Mhm.
just chilling, eating grass,
It calms you.
quiet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It grounds you.
It really
When
does.
things get kind of hectic and things don't make sense, it's like I always think of going back to Oakdale and sitting on like our deck and looking out over the pasture, looking out on all the orchards, and it calms you. It centers you in a way.
Mhm.
And that's important as a creative, which brings me to like my next topic. I wanted to talk to you about this just because I don't think we've ever actually had this conversation, but because we come from such a blue collar area,
Mm-hmm.
because our family, literally everybody in our family, none of them were creatives in the sense,
Right.
So I've always kind of wondered, where did we get our creative streak from?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've always kind of wondered. Like,
Yeah.
how did we're the only people in our family, even our friend group, really. I don't know really hardly anybody from our upbringing, our childhoods, who kind of had similar passions, similar inclinations in terms of creative road.
Right.
Where do you think we got it from?
You looking back on the way we were raised, specifically growing up in a very religious household
Mhm.
and growing up around religious narratives
Mm-hmm.
and growing up around religious text, at this age, I really do see that as probably a catalyst to our creativity as a youngster. Here's the reason why. When you grow up around religious text, you're growing up around action. You're growing up around sci-fi. You're growing up around romance. If you read Song of Solomon. And of course, as a young boy, I was in that. Not only did you have to memorize it, but let's be real. When you're a young boy and you see something about a woman's breasts and you're 7 years old and you're reading the Bible, you're going to read about the women's breasts in Song of Solomon. That is literally in the Bible. So let's just put it out there. But here's the thing. Your creativity is derived from the narratives that you are fed as a youngster.
Mm.
And the one thing about growing up in a religious household and also growing up in a Christian family and
Christian community
and a Christian school, every day you were spoon-fed narratives that fell into categories that you can also find on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Netflix, you're going to flip through genres. You're going to find romance, you're going to find action, you're going to find thriller, you're going to find sci-fi, all of these different genres. And as you get older and you start to reflect on where you came from and you see the narratives that you were exposed to as a young kid, they almost parallel the narratives that are on the content that is, being shown to you today. You really start to see, wow, not only was I exposed to, great messaging, spiritual enlightenment, all of these things that were, pushing me to be a better person, be a better, member of society, but really the things that I was exposed to and the messaging, I feel like that was one of the places where creativity came from.
That's interesting. I haven't really thought about that too much. Obviously, religion in general will shape you in some way, shape, or form, but in terms of impacting creativity, that's something that I actually haven't thought about. So my question to you is not a rebuttal, not a devil's advocate really, but how did that affect you in terms of your creativity, in terms of like comparison with other people who grew up very religious but are the furthest thing from creativity, or from being a creative person,
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that comes down to, it's funny, we were just at a family dinner and one of our family friends kept pointing at me and was like, you were the kid that was saying, why this, why that, why this, why that? And it comes down to just like, it comes down to questioning things, right?
Yeah, being curious.
Being curious. Like, as a creative, curiosity should drive you, right? Like, you're always looking for the why. You're always asking people, you sit down with interviews, you're asking people the questions and you're digging, right? You're just digging. And the one thing that's really cool about sitting down with someone in an interview is you're able to keep digging. It's like an infinite opportunity to dig with a single person. Keep asking people questions. Pivot, ask another question, pivot, ask another question, just keep digging. When you grow up in a religious household, one of the things that is really unique is that it puts you in a box and you don't question.
It's pretty black and white.
It's very black and white.
Yeah.
You don't question. You don't ask why. You just accept. And so if you're a young male living in the early 2000s and you have access to the internet, of course you're asking questions. Like, you'll go back to school, you'll go back to church, you'll keep listening, you'll listen to mom, you'll listen to dad. But the reality is you're going to be asking questions. And so you keep asking questions. And I think, to my point about being raised in a religious household and why that, impacted our creativity, is like, it almost forced you into a feedback loop of asking questions, which is what creativity is defined by. You're constantly asking why.
Yeah, and a lot of those questions that you probably asked or wanted to ask, they couldn't be answered, because that's the whole mystery of faith. And so therefore that cultivates your inclination to continue to ask questions.
Exactly.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And that's where it all comes from. There are quite a few like thought leaders or creatives that I've followed during my rise as a creative. And what it's always come down to is like, they come from a religious background and you look at what keeps them going. It's their why. Like, you're constantly seeking something because your expectation is something that's so high where until you find that, you aren't going to stop. And let me tell you, you ain't going to ever find it while you're living. So you might as well just keep looking.
Right, exactly. Like, there's no definitive answer you're going to get while you're alive.
Yeah.
And if there's nothing on the other end, you're not going to even get an answer either, because lights are out.
Exactly.
But if there is something, then you get an answer.
And I think that's something that's really shared across the community where we grew up. So you're able to align with your local community when you go back home or when you're around family. You can, have those conversations. Obviously, they're not going to be the same conversations that we're having right now. That's why we're having them, right? Like, we're going to put shit on like Spotify and put it on Apple Music, and no one's going to be able to like corner us and question us. But this is real. Like, your ability to have these conversations right now as a creator. And I was just like on that conversation today with Thor. I had an interview with Thor. Thor is a Norwegian content creator. We had a conversation this morning, and one of the things we were talking about was like, as a creator, what's your purpose when you believe that there is a higher power? And what we came to not agree on, but what the conversation that we came to was so different than what most people are having those conversations around where we're from. So you start to just accept, and that's back to your point. It's like you start to accept other people's belief systems, and they're not scary. They're so fulfilling, and they make you feel so good because you're just like, this guy believes this because he experienced this other scenario in his life, or this guy believes this because the cultural upbringing that he experienced for 20 years didn't even know that my culture existed. That's what's so cool about traveling and being a content creator is you're able to go out and experience all these different people, and it's the endless pursuit to find the creator.
Yeah, those are some great points. I need to digest that even a little bit more. But going back to the topic on how we became kind of who we are, the creatives that we are, where that really came from, I've always kind of had the debate in my head, is creativity nature or nurture, right? Nature, you're kind of born with it. Nurture, is it something that is built into you? And, I tend to lean a little bit more towards nature. Like you're almost kind of born with that, because you can't really teach creativity. You can experience different things in life that can cultivate it, suppress it, whatever it might be. But just from working in the creative space, it's definitely something that you're kind of just born with it. And I think that what kind of cultivated it for us, because it wasn't a parent, it wasn't a mentor, it wasn't a teacher or whatever. Looking back on it, I think there's two main things. But what you just said sparks a lot of things in me. And, I think that's very valid as well. But just from what I've kind of thought about on my end of things, one of it I think came from, we had the privilege of being able to we traveled a pretty good amount as kids. So that goes back to our point of being able to see different cultures, different experiences, and analyze that, and then assimilate kind of what we learned into our own beings and our own knowledge. And I think that kind of played into having a broader view in life. I think that's super important. And that's something that unfortunately a lot of people who are from small towns, they don't have the opportunity as much to leave, to see more experiences. And we were lucky. We were very blessed for that. And the other thing I think, at least in my opinion, which almost kind of contradicts what I just said in a way, growing up in a small town like Oakdale, life is a little bit slower pace, right? So you almost have more time to think. Like when we were kids, we were always building forts, playing army man. We were making little home videos. We were doing stuff that I think it came down to the fact that life was slower pace. And so we had more time to almost kind of explore our inner creativity. There was wide open spaces. And I think as cliche as it sounds, there is something about the fact being in nature, being in a more quiet environment, away from kind of the hustle and bustle of modern day society. There is something about that I do think cultivates one's ability to think, to have ideas, to go down different rabbit holes with things they think about. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
And Oakdale brought that,
Oakdale is Oakdale and those small towns. It's not even just Oakdale, but it's a small town in the United States, right? Think about Oakdale, the way I look at it, being in marketing, being in sales. When you think about what indoctrinates you as a consumer in the matrix, okay? The first thing I think about, and it's been around for decades, is billboards. We know how many billboards there are in Oakdale. There are less billboards on my fingers, okay? Now you drive through LA or you drive through San Francisco, there are so many billboards pitching products, pitching narratives, pitching indoctrination loops.
External things outside of yourself.
Slapped across the face all day long, literally, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Constantly, it's
eat this, take this, do this.
Oh my gosh. How do you even have your own thoughts when you're just getting completely sold every single second? And of course, there are benefits of growing up in the city, but there are also benefits to growing up in rural communities. And I would say in the world we're living in today, where IQ is being completely smashed by EQ, what I mean by that is emotional intelligence, understanding yourself is completely dominating intellectual capacity. Oh, you're smart. Oh, you went and got a PhD? Cool. Guess what? We can have conversations. We understand you. I understand what emotion you're feeling. The only reason that people from rural communities, they completely dominate that sector is because they had the capacity to think for themselves when they were a kid. I mean, to me, it's I could go on for hours about this. When I drive through a city and I see billboards everywhere, the only thing you think about is, why do they want my attention? And then when you grow up in a place like Oakdale and you realize that the only people that want your attention are family and friends.
Yeah, people who genuinely care about you and love you, and
Exactly.
And that's the irony, is even though Oakdale feels so secluded, like its own little utopia or bubble, or it's away from the real world, the irony is when I'm back in Oakdale, I almost feel like I'm in real life more so than another big city. I feel like I'm actually this is more so reality, even though it is a little bubble. But it's because there is that interpersonal feeling there with other people, that connection that you get in a small town that I think that generally you don't get quite as much of in a bigger city. It's like a micro ecosystem that kind of represents America as a whole. America, maybe not the past few decades in terms of how we feel about America, a lot of people, but in general, America, there's that feeling of pride. There's that feeling of togetherness. There's that feeling of, you're an American, I trust you. You get that tenfold in a small town. You know what I mean? It's very symbolic of America. It's like you were talking about earlier, on a very foundational level, small towns like Oakdale in the Central Valley, they are kind of what built this country.
Right.
You know, it's a kind of like a remnant of the past in a way. I mean, you still feel that sense of togetherness and that sense of community and that sense of loyalty to one another. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. When you're overseas and you meet someone that is from the United States, you immediately connect. And it doesn't matter like which part of the United States you're from. Because when you look at the states, all 50 states are so different. Yeah. And like the regions here in the United States are completely different. But at the end of the day, you're an American. And there's this level of togetherness.
Right.
But when you are from the United States and you also grew up in a small town, there's a level of connectivity that is undescribable. And the reason that is because you know your ancestral traumas that the people who experience the same thing from other places also experience. So their families are the same as your family. So when I meet someone that's from a small town in Nebraska, a town of 20,000 people, I almost know what their friend group was like when they grew up.
Yeah.
It's a little different. Whereas when I meet someone from Los Angeles, just as an example, of course there are small cities and there are like small suburbs of Los Angeles, but when I meet people from small towns that almost like replicate the same attributes that Oakdale has, it's like you can almost assume what their upbringing was like because you know what their social circle was like. And that's what's super unique about being raised in a small town is like, it's like a micro community of a micro community. And the micro community is like rural communities, but then you also take that to another level. Like 20,000 people is really small when you've traveled and you've been at places. Like 20,000 is small. You can't go anywhere in Oakdale without running into someone you know.
Right. And that's like something that's kind of cool. It's like whenever you go out in town in Oakdale, you're running into somebody. And I've always kind of taken that for granted. Even there's some times where, I don't want to go there. I don't want to run into somebody. Not because I don't like them, just because sometimes I can be antisocial. And I don't want to talk right now. I don't want to have a conversation. And that's something that I so take for granted because how rare is that? You know, you go outside and all of a sudden you see somebody that you know and you're able to have a quality conversation with somebody that you share experiences with. I think that too, it's like what you were saying, when you meet somebody who's from a small town in general, you know that they just kind of get it. You know, they get it because they've experienced so many similar experiences growing up. And I think kind of what plays into that bond that you have with somebody, even if you don't even really know them, is the fact that growing up, we had a smaller scope of like influence in a way, like our concepts, the things we experienced as a kid growing up, they were much more refined than say growing up in a big city. There's less in a small town. And so therefore there's kind of a smaller scope of possible experiences. And so therefore you can relate to somebody a lot easier because chances are that person experienced very similar things. Like our concepts in Oakdale, right? When we think about a concept, like for example, if we say tree around somebody from Oakdale, chances are their concept of a tree is an almond tree. When you say the word tree around somebody from LA, their concept of a tree is a palm tree. So it's kind of interesting to think about things like that. The ability to relate to concepts like that. And that's just one example, but you can say going out. What does going out mean to somebody from Oakdale? That means going down to H bar. That means going down to the one bar, having a good time.
Right.
What does going out? What's that concept mean to somebody from the big city? What do you mean? That means going out, for 3 hours, bar hopping all across the entire city, whatever it is, going to the club, going to this place and that place. So it just kind of comes down to, I think, the concepts that we share. And because Oakdale is small and small towns are much more limited, you have the likelihood increases of sharing those similar concepts,
Right. I think as a creative too, taking those concepts and really line iteming those concepts in a way where you're able to reflect on those concepts and say, hey, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, and this is what I need to figure out as a creative is the most important thing, because as a creative, your job is to discover, right? And self-discovery is a huge piece of developing your story. And when you develop your story, you can create.
Yeah.
And as creatives, our job is to discover. And so if we're not able to sit down and with someone and discover their story, we need to put them into a place and get them into a conversation where we can get them to self-discover. And what's really unique from the experiences that I've had as a creative, I've traveled to 36 states. I've been to 30 countries. I've created content for hundreds of businesses. The one thing that's really interesting is when I sit down with people and they're able to self-discover. Like, I can sit down and discover all day. This is what I do for a living, right? I can sit down and dig into your story. But once you get someone on that like perpetual self-discovery journey, you just start to see their story come out. And oftentimes the thing that gets them closest to their origin is digging into where they grew up, where they're from, how they were raised, what drives them to be who they are. And I think being raised in a small town, it's almost like you start at the bottom. And like, if you start at the bottom and you fight your way up, you can always look back and say, I'm from there. I grew up there. I saw that. But if you grew up at the top, and like, I'm not sitting here talking about money, because like, we're not going to have that conversation about, oh, we didn't grow up with anything, or we didn't grow up, having resources or accessibility. It's not about that. It's about, who are you surrounded with? What were the stories being told around you? How do those stories relate to other people? Because as a storyteller, you're just trying to take a medium and connect it with another audience. So being raised in a small town, it's one of those things where you really start to like appreciate the stories and the narratives that you were fed, because you're going to relate to way more people than you think.
Right. And touching on that too, it's kind of like the stories you hear, the narratives you hear. There's kind of a dichotomy in Oakdale. On one end of the spectrum, like we've been talking about, you feel that sense of community, that having each other's back mentality. But then there's the other side of the spectrum where there is the small town drama. There's the small town talking. There's the kind of some of that toxicity that comes with being in a small town. You can go down a rabbit hole as to why that is. Maybe it's boredom, maybe it's spite, whatever it is. But that does tend to be something that occurs a little bit more in a small town. But even with that, like, if you observe that, you can kind of take it two ways. You can kind of fall into that kind of toxicity, or you can observe it and kind of learn from it and take bits and pieces of it, their experiences, and then understand what they're saying, how they're communicating, and then assimilate that into your storytelling toolbox. Right. Until you understand people better. That's kind of like the show Friday Night Lights, right? It's about a small town in Texas where football is life, lots of drama going on, but they're good people. Kind of echoes Oakdale. And the irony of that show is it's about football, but about 80% of it is more so about the drama of the players and the families. And that's something that you can kind of take as a storyteller, like what makes these people this way? What makes them say that? What makes their motivations like that? And that's something that I think you can take a positive out of that. That's something was kind of interesting that I thought about in terms of growing up. You hear that, Oakdale, this is small town drama, a bunch of and it's just how you interpret it, it's how you react to it.
Yeah, I think most of the things that we experience come down to how we react to it, right? And I think you're right. You're right. Growing up in a small town community where everyone knows everyone knows your everyone knows what your parents did. That's funny because we experienced that
4 generations ago.
Yeah. They're like, hey, I've heard your great grandfather did X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, geez. My great-grandfather and I must be from the same lineage because I did X, Y, and Z as well. But yeah, when you grew up in a small town, it's generational. Your generational experiences stay within a community, which is, it's one, it's dangerous, but two, it's also extremely educational because you sit there and you go, I had no idea. How many people actually, this is actually crazy. How many people actually know anything about their lineage? Growing up in a small town, your lineage is literally in the museum in the town. Yeah. You meet anyone else from like anywhere else, you're like, dude, what's your ethnic makeup? And they're like, oh, I think I'm Irish or German or like X, Y, and Z. And they're like, I don't really know, to be completely honest. I'm like, I'm 25% Serbian. I'm 38% German. I'm 26% Norwegian. I'm 24%, English, whatever. When you grow up in a small town and you're like, your lineage is so much more important. And as a storyteller, when you start to like dive into other cultures and you're really diving into what those cultures have done to the narratives that people have been fed, it's like, holy cow, if you even understand your lineage, you're 15 to 35 steps ahead of everyone. And as a creative, that's huge, because then you start to be able to relate to people. You start to talk. You're from Finland. You're Scandinavian. We're Vikings. And they're like, yeah. And Thor and I were just talking about this today. I was just on a call with Thor talking about our lineage and our like generational experiences that we didn't even get to experience in our own physical reality. But when you're from a small town, oftentimes the people around you have also had the same generational experiences. So what their families are used to, you're used to doing with your family. What their family's Thanksgivings looks like, it looks like your family Thanksgiving. And so that's really special growing up and knowing that like you have a community. They might not be your family, but they're from your community. They're from your local community and they're your family. They really are.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. I think as well, something that on a subconscious level that has helped us become who we are today, coming from Oakdale and the Central Valley in general, is the principle of working hard, working for what you want. And, it is a blue collar mentality there. Like we've been talking about, you don't find a whole lot of creatives coming there. A lot of people are in, manufacturing, agriculture, firefighting, police officers, and they work their asses off.
Right.
Like our grandpa, he was an almond orchard farmer, peach orchards, walnuts too, right?
He was a farmer.
Yeah.
And like that's like at the root of it, being a farmer. When you're from the Central Valley and you're a farmer, there are a few things that you understand. One, you understand uncertainty. So that puts a little bit of a pressure on your family, right? Like you're always under the knife, not knowing what the next year is going to look like. Number two, you understand hard work. You or your kids, your sons or your daughters are waking up really early. They're going irrigating. They're going to check lines. They're going to check to make sure that frost hasn't lined down the trees. There are things that they're embedded in you when you're from the Central Valley. And even if you're not a farmer or you come from a farming family, you almost like embody that.
Oh, sure. It's the power of environment.
It really is.
It's the culture that just takes over you. Like we weren't really doing that as kids.
No, I mean, I remember irrigating a couple times here and there, doing tasks around the ranch. But the reality is you just put yourself on that level. You're like, I know what that rancher is doing. Therefore, whatever I do, I'm going to do that at that capacity.
Yeah, with whatever you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're just brought up in it and it motivates you.
It really does. And I think that being raised in Oakdale specifically, where there's a dominant sports culture, there's this underlying expectation to succeed.
Yeah, to be great.
And the platform to do that is truly agriculture. Like, how many times did we go to morning practice, during our sports experiences here at Oakdale, where there were kids that were literally coming off the irrigation lines, or there were kids that would show up in their boots because they had just checked the trees, whatever. It's like, okay, we're not only here to fight for our team, but we're here to fight for our culture. Yeah. This is our culture. We produce, we create. And so as a creator, you're like, wow, maybe you're not creative by today's societal norms, but you're creating, you're producing, you're making. And it doesn't have to be some creative thought. It's literally just for repetition. Waking up every day at 5 a.m. to check the irrigation line, waking up every day at 5 a.m. to check the sheep, waking up at 5 a.m. every day to check the cows. It's like that repetition is creating. I think that's crazy to think about as a creator, is you don't have to be creating from a unique interpretation every time. You could be creating from repetition, which is the same thing over and over again, which is what we come from.
Right.
And that's why I think Oakdale and the small town communities are so special, is because they might not create from unique experiences, but they create from repetition. They create from consistency. and they create from grit and integrity.
Yeah, I agree.
That was going to be the most fire reel ever.
That's good.
God, we're making fire reels in here. But that's the thing. It's crazy because, like, I sit back sometimes and I'm like, you know, I grew up, my dad's family comes from cattle. My mom's family comes from trees.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, when you're from the valley, yeah, that sounds like super simple from the outside world. But the reality is like the expectation and the experience that they experienced was so different. Dealing with cattle, you're dealing with a lot of moving pieces. You're dealing with live animals. You're dealing with death, disease, all this. And we deal with trees. You're dealing with weather. You're dealing with a lot of people dealing with picking and all these things. So you come from like a people management side of things. You're coming from like Mother Nature side of things. Looking back on my mom and my dad, our mom and our dad, I see that they both came from different expectations. And then when you look at like the rest of the community, you're like, yeah, like when you meet someone, you're like, oh, I'm from a small town. The first thing I try and like dig into is, oh, did you come from an ag background? And then when they say they came from an ag background, you always find out if they're like from livestock or from trees. And as soon as you find out, you're like, oh, like I can relate to that. Yeah. But as soon as you find that out, you realize you're like, wow, we relate because we're from a small town.
What would you say, having experienced so many different cities, different people, having lived outside of Oakdale now for a while, what do you think is the biggest difference, in your opinion, between people in general that you meet who were raised in more metropolitan areas compared to Oakdale, small towns in the Central Valley? What would you say is like the biggest difference?
You know, we were very fortunate to grow up in a household that exposed us to those metropolitan areas. We spent a lot of time in the Bay Area as kids. We spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and really around the United States, which was different. But here's the thing. The one thing that I would say about being raised in a small town and being raised in the environment that I was raised in, being raised in a rural community and being raised around people who share the same mindset, is we will fight longer, we will work harder, and we will last longer every single time.
Yeah, it's more of a survivalist instinct.
You have a survival instinct. And I don't know what that comes from. I have thoughts. I think that a lot of times, you know, those thoughts come from, as a farmer, there are seasons of feast and there are seasons of famine.
Yeah, the unpredictability.
Sure, exactly. And one of the things that I live on this. I realize, like, I tell myself this every single day. I will work harder, I will work longer, I will fight, and I will conquer. And the reason I say that is because I was put in a position as a young kid to experience that, but also, most importantly, be around a sphere of influences who've not only wanted to experience that, but they have experienced that. And therefore, it's given me the confidence to know that I can do that as well. And when I look at like how are kids from the Valley different than kids from anywhere else, they're going to you up. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
They're always going to work harder. And that's something that as a creative, like I might not be the most creative person. I might not have the most like creative effects or whatever, but I will work every single night till 1 a.m. the next morning. It doesn't matter. Like that's just normal. Oh, you're working till 1 a.m. That's cool. People don't have that in the industry as a creator. They don't want to work nonstop. But the thing is like if you pair blue collar upbringing with modern day white collar finance and creativity, you've got something dangerous. And that's why I think the Scaling Creator and everything that we're doing here with proposing opportunities for creators, it's freaking dangerous, man. Like I'm sitting here going like, okay, who can I pull in as a creator from a blue collar community who has that same like drive, the tenacity, the grit, and most importantly, the integrity.
Yeah.
Because people don't follow through.
I was going to go down that rabbit hole a little bit. Just
it's
like
crazy.
The importance of values. And that's something that I've kind of seen when comparing people that you meet from, let's say, you know, LA or something. You know, this is not, I don't want to sound general here because there are obviously exceptions. There are very good people from everywhere. But just from my personal experience, when you meet people from like bigger cities and stuff, there does seem to be an underlying kind of lack of solid values with a lot of them.
A little wishy-washy,
just it's different from where, you know, small towns like Oakdale, they tend to be a little bit more self-absorbed, a little bit more materialistic, a little bit kind of, like you said, just wishy-washy, just not really having a core identity. And I think that's something that I picked up on. And then when comparing it to Oakdale, there is that feeling of really having solidified values, having solidified morals, like you said, integrity. Integrity is super important. It's going to help you open doors wherever you are in life, regardless of industry, professionally, personally. That's super important, like holding true to your word, following through. And I think that's something that small towns really do kind of embody. And obviously there's exceptions there too. There's in small towns, but there is just that underlying feeling of what you see is what you get. You know, there's not as many angles. People aren't trying to jab you in the back as much. People just seem more genuine. They're just more present. They're just more real in a sense, you know, and that's why I look at all my best friends, they're all my childhood friends for the most part. That's just because I trust them in a way, because I know at the end of the day, they're good people on a very core fundamental level. They have good values. That's something that I really appreciate about Oakdale. And I think that's shaped us too in this world of business and doing what we're doing. It's really easy, especially in our industry, to kind of lose yourself, lose your way a little bit. You see it, people getting cheated, people cheating other people. And I think because we came from where we came from, we've been able to kind of weather that storm, you know, and maintain our values and treat people with respect. And that goes a long way, as cliche as it sounds.
Absolutely. It really does. And I think as a creator, you would look for those opportunities to spend time creating with people from similar backgrounds. I look at some of the relationships that I've built as a creator, and I find myself always aligning with people who come from similar backgrounds. And it's probably because there's a mutual level of trust. Mm-hmm. And that mutual level of trust comes from integrity. Mm-hmm. Because in a world where you can almost like portray anything, the one thing that you can test is someone's integrity, and you'll test that with one contract.
Yeah.
One contract.
Right.
And you'll know.
Right.
And when you find someone that they come from a place where they don't even know what a contract is, because it's a handshake. Mm-hmm. The handshake is the contract. Mm-hmm. And you look them right in the eyes and you say, look, I'm going to get this done, and they're going to do it. And they're going to do it because they're going to put food on their family's table. That is why when I do business with someone from the Central Valley, mm-hmm. I know it's like, they're going to deliver.
Right. And I was just going to say, if you look at our own personal experience, mm-hmm. the jobs that we've done with our business in the Central Valley, in the Oakdale area, compared to jobs we've done with clients outside of that area.
Oh my gosh.
How many of them from Oakdale did we have to beg to get paid? And how many clients did we work with outside of Oakdale where we had to beg to get paid?
Mm-hmm. It's an integrity thing. And that's the thing. Like when you're up in a small town,
it's kind of all you have sometimes.
It's all you have.
Yeah.
Like, it's
a beautiful thing.
It's indescribable.
Mm-hmm. That can get you a lot of places in life. Just holding true to your word and following through. And I wish more of this state especially had that. People will try to take advantage of you. And that goes back to what I'm saying about Oakdale is, you know, you meet people that just kind of, what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
You know? And I love that.
That's a fact. Yeah. I'm looking forward to going back here soon. And I know, really just like, especially now that we have this podcast going, being able to sit down with people in Oakdale who, one, have been outside of Oakdale to get the experience, but two, have the experience looking at what we're doing and saying, you know what, I really understand what you're doing, and I want to continue this narrative, because the people I'm looking to work with are from these small towns in the United States, and not even in the United States. I'm looking to work with people who are from small towns, who share the same values, who have shared similar experiences, who want to deliver results and also impact people. And that person I'm looking for is likely from somewhere I grew up in, because we shared the same experiences growing up. Mm-hmm. That's it. We had the same sphere of influence. Even though our friends were different, they might be, have different names, have different life experiences. They play different sports. They might be a different color. But the reality is when you come from a small town, you understand that people experience the same things, and those same things are almost contagious throughout small communities.
And I think a lot of people, what really bothers me is some of those people who, you know, like in Oakdale, for example, you have those people that always say, oh, I hate Oakdale, I can't wait to leave. And they leave and then nothing but talk Oakdale. Oh, F that place, backwards town. You know, that shows me as somebody who is kind of ignorant, because even if Oakdale didn't necessarily align with your beliefs or you didn't quite get what you wanted out of it, there's always that one or two things that you could learn from. You cannot possibly look back on it and say that there's nothing positive that came out of your experience. Even if it's something negative that you experienced, you can take that negative information that you experienced and then apply it to, okay, this is how I don't want to be. So then I'm going to go be this. So at least you can say, I learned from my town this. I learned this from my town, and that's why I became this. And now I am in this position because I learned how I don't want to be. And that's just a mature understanding of a situation, a mature way to view things. And it's kind of funny too. You see a lot of people who talk on Oakdale, oh, I can't wait to leave, but they're still there. They're still there year after year after year after year. And all they do is talk, but yet they're still there.
Oh, don't even get me started, please. Like,
if you hate it so much, leave. You know?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. You know, like they go to college. They go to college and they realize that there's a world that's different than where they were raised. And it's like, yeah, no, there's a world outside that's different than where you were raised. Like, there are 20,000 people in Oakdale. There are 8 billion people on the planet. So if you do the math, there's a big difference.
There might be an outside world.
There might be an outside world. They might be a little bit different. But here's the thing. You're not going to change what you experienced. And so when you try and force it away from yourself and you try and like reject everything that you experienced between the ages of 1 and 18, what you're going to end up with is resentment and hatred towards everything. And I can think of a couple different cases, but one in particular, I'm friends with people who have left Oakdale and ended up turning around and they just see Oakdale as like, oh my goodness,
they're
like
so above
they're
Oakdale.
so above Oakdale. Yeah. And like you could talk about being above Oakdale. Like, yeah, oh, you're above Oakdale? You're in Sonora. Your elevation's higher than Oakdale. Isn't that funny? Like, look how I just flipped the narrative on you. Did you know that Oakdale has more millionaires
per capita
than anyone? And there are
more, but at one point,
okay,
yes.
There are billionaires in Oakdale. There are 100 millionaires in Oakdale. And there are, I know, tons of 8-figure families and 8-figure earners in Oakdale. So when you go and say you're going to leave Oakdale and go become a lawyer, or you're going to go become a doctor, and you like freaking hate everything that Oakdale stands for, you know what you say to me? You're freaking stupid. And well, they don't understand this, and this about the world. And like, you don't understand this, and this about what these people figured out how to become free. It's not about how much money you make. At the end of the day, it's really not about how much money you make. It's not about how much money you think you can make. It's really about what community you have to go back to when hits the fan and everything's sour and you don't have a job because technology took it. What community are you going to go back to? You know what community I want to go back to? Oakdale.
Yeah.
I think about it all the time. I'm like, when singularity happens and all technology has completely run through jobs, the one place I want to be on earth is Oakdale.
Right.
Why? Because everyone's going to still be treating you the same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
They don't see a dollar sign over
They don't see a dollar sign.
Yeah. They see you as a human being.
They don't. It's crazy. And like, I have, you get me all fired up on this topic, but here's the deal. You can't, like, if you grew up in Oakdale and you are going to be successful and you're pushing for that, you know, that next level in life, Oakdale is your advantage. Oakdale is what's going to give you that edge. You're not going to find that anywhere else. You can't. It's in your DNA. Like, you are literally bred by your community. And when you look back on your life, the one thing that's going to give you that edge is where you grew up.
Yeah. And we've seen that play out a lot too. People that support us significantly in what we do, even though there's not many people who come from Oakdale that are doing what we do, we've seen the support tenfold. You know, it goes back to when we kind of first got into making movies, making content. We made the OKG documentary for the community about the Oakdale High football program. and people just rallied around not only the film but us as well.
Right.
The feedback that we got and the amount of support. Hey, keep doing what you're doing. We love what you're doing. You know, you go get them, make it. And you just felt that. And then we kept putting out projects and whatnot, and the support just grew. And that's something that's so beautiful about Oakdale is they do rally around people, even if it's something that they might not fully understand. Like, I guarantee you, if we asked our friends from Oakdale, even a lot of our family, what exactly do we do, right? And it's no anger towards that. It is complex what we do, but my point is the fact that a lot of the people from Oakdale don't even really fully understand what we do, what goes into it, the travel involved, the variables. But yeah, you know what? They're still there to support you no matter what.
Yeah.
They still have your back. They still want you to succeed. And that just makes me appreciate Oakdale, tremendously.
There is literally nothing better than going on a project and flying home and getting picked up by mom at the airport and going home to Oakdale and waking up the next morning, walking out on the balcony and looking out over the town and saying, this is where I'm from. Yeah. This is exactly where I should be.
I feel that. I always think about it too, like if there ever was some type of apocalyptic event, or some invading country invades us like Red Dawn, it's like, where's the first place we're going? We're
Oakdale,
going straight home to Oakdale, bud, and we got guns there, and people don't hold them sideways either. They hold them straight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to spending more time in Oakdale here this summer.
Me too. What's that feeling that you get when you get back to Oakdale, like on a very intrinsic level? What do you feel when you go back? Because I can relate to that exactly. Like coming in from a job or just being away from home for a while and coming back, there's a very physical feeling that I feel.
Yeah, I feel whole.
Yeah.
It's a feeling of, being... I feel like I am home, and everything that I've done for the past 7 years has been for my community, really. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're constantly putting out projects for Oakdale. It's why we're constantly coming back. Mm-hmm. It's because I feel whole when I'm in Oakdale. I don't feel whole when I'm in New York. I don't feel whole when I'm in Miami.
I don't even feel whole in San Luis Obispo.
I don't feel whole in San Luis Obispo.
Yeah.
And the reason I feel so whole when I'm in Oakdale is because who would you relate to? You would relate to the people that you grew up with. Mm-hmm. You'd relate to the people who came up from your community. Yeah. And that's why I feel that way about Oakdale. Mm-hmm. So love it, hate it. I've talked bad about Oakdale. There's no doubt about it. There are things that I don't like about the town.
For sure.
Get rid of the Starbuckses.
And the Dutch Bros.
And just
get some barbecue.
Oakdale great.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, love Oakdale always. I mean, for me personally, it'll always be home. Like no matter where we go, it's like, and touching a little bit more on like what we do now, putting projects out. I want people to know at the end of the day that so much of what motivates me, so much of what I do it for, who I do it for, is the town of Oakdale. Like I hope that I hope one day, whenever it is, I can just say, shout out Oakdale. Like, this is from my hometown. Let me tell you a story about it. Let me tell you how it shaped me into the man I become. It's a good story. You should listen to it. Shout out Oakdale,
Right.
When that will be, where, but, it'd be awesome to be able to continue doing what we do and put that town on the map more, because it is a great town, and I don't want people to keep moving there. I like when I talk to people and they, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Oakdale. Oh, I don't know where that's from. I like it. I like that. I don't want you to know where it's from, because it keeps keeps it small. Yeah. It's a small town culture.
I will say, when you meet people, when you're 3,000 miles away from Oakdale and you meet someone from Oakdale, I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
I've never met anyone from far from Oakdale. When I say I'm from Oakdale, California, and they're like, where's that? Whenever I meet someone and they know where Oakdale is, let me tell you something. They have status. They know where Oakdale is, and there's a reason they know where Oakdale is. And it's not because we've got a cool rodeo or because we don't have barbecue. It's because there are some big hitters in Oakdale. There are continuously going to be big hitters coming out of Oakdale for the next generation.
Sure. Yeah, this was a good talk. It was cool to kind of reflect on our upbringing, because I don't think we've really fleshed it out like that in this much detail for a while. That's our hometown, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We're definitely going to be diving into some more rabbit holes with some of the topics that we did bring up in this one. soon to come with later episodes. So thanks for tuning in on the Scaling Creator podcast, the pilot episode here, the first one.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning into the Scaling Creator podcast. This was the first episode with Soren and Eriksen Dickens. We look forward to discussing more about our upbringing and how it created the creators that we are today. Stay tuned.